Hi, and welcome to Nightlight. With me on the program today is Carole Ward. Carole is the founder and director of Favor Africa. She's had a book published about her mission to northern Uganda and South Sudan, available on Amazon, called Send Me Where No One Wants to Go. Thank you, Carole, for taking your time to be with us on Nightlight and sharing with us your story.
Thank you. I'm Carole Ward, and third-generation missionary. My grandparents were in China for 30 years and taken POWs during communist invasion, so there was a history there. And then my parents were in Philippines for 45 years, but Bible translators in Muslim terrorist area, which is where I grew up. And then I've been in Africa now for going on 15 years.
You came as a nurse.
Yes, I'm a nurse, but came to Uganda just with a passion for prayer and said, Lord, send me where no one else wants to go. And that's all I prayed. I mean, I want to see unreached people groups reach for Jesus.
Nightlight. What a delight.
And we're sitting on the porch of my house near the beautiful Lake Victoria. It's so peaceful and serene and just beautiful here. It's hard to imagine that just a few hundred miles away in South Sudan, it could be so different and so dangerous, with horrible killings and different factions and tribes literally slaughtering each other, with millions of refugees fleeing over the border to find refuge in Uganda. And yet, in spite of all of this, Carole, you've dared to go in where angels fear to tread, and I'd like you to share with us some of the amazing miracles that you've experienced in South Sudan over the recent years.
One of the things that my heart is always focused on is, the main thing is a Great Commission. Jesus said, make disciples of all nations. And I realize it's real easy to come and go and do evangelism, but discipleship means getting in the trenches and living life with people. And it's a lifelong process to see a transformation of a nation, of a generation, transform people, transform nations. And so that's a lot of work, and it's a lot of time and effort, because you're entering into culture to see it become kingdom culture, but keep the good and spit out the bad, you know. So with that in our hearts, about 2007, before South Sudan became an independent country, I started crossing the border and going into South Sudan with teams of Ugandan missionaries that now I had trained. And we had always prayed, if you want God to do something for you, begin praying that for somebody else, because what you give, you receive. So we've been praying for this nation for quite some time. So as we prayed, we've said, Lord, what do you want us to do to reach them? We put our hands on the map. We've said, where should we go? Where do we begin? They've had 55, it's not 55, it's more like 67 consecutive years of guerrilla war. And you just think they were born in war, they've grown up in war, and one guy was 65, almost 70, and he was just crying. He said, and I don't want to die in the war. But no government, no UN, nothing has been able to stop this. But because of what we saw God do in northern Uganda, when the UN said it was the worst atrocities they'd seen since Hitler, government couldn't stop it. We knew it had to do with Islamic strongholds being fed their weapons. Kony was fed his weapons from northern Muslim terrorist groups. And so there was a mixture of cult, tribalism, spiritual darkness, Christians against Muslims, that kind of thing, just continuation. Well, this is the same thing. But because of what we saw God do in northern Uganda, we said, man, he can do it again. He can do it again. So we started going. And we went with the gospel, and we went with prayer in 2007. And we began kind of researching the area and saying, where are the most rural tribes? We went to naked headhunter out up in the mountains of eastern Equatoria, unreached with the gospel. You'd think they had spears, but these guys all have AK-47s that they've confiscated off of the bodies of dead soldiers after that many years of war. And the kids keep their cattle and guard the cows with AK-47s, 8-year-old children. So they're very unpredictable. They kill everybody. And then we've been into the Arab capital at that time of Wow, which is extremely Middle Eastern and Arab ruled and Muslim influence, which is on the western part of South Sudan, all the way up to Awil, which is by Darfur. And 5 days driving through cattle raiders and cattle ranchers and nomadic people that would just shoot and kill and, steal cows, pulled off the road by gunpoint, by military. Many, many, many stories. So when we started praying for Sudan at that time, we thought, how do we go in? Because to establish a portable Bible school, which is discipleship, and we stay on the ground in an area for 2 months in one village to see a village really reached. And that's the beginning of our discipleship foundation. And we've been doing that all over northern Uganda. Probably 1,000 churches planted after the war within 5 years. It just was radical explosion. So we wanted to take this same concept north. But we needed to start with prayer, and we needed to start with evangelism because the nation's still at war. So one of the trips I was taking up north, we had planned to leave on a certain day, and I had my whole team with me. And that particular day, I started just throwing up. I was sick, and I don't ever get sick. And I thought, this is really weird, and we've got everything ready, and the cars are packed, and the team's ready, but we couldn't travel, and I was kind of frustrated about it. But as I was praying, I had such a peace in my heart that somehow God was blocking us from going that day. I went through the day like that. I was fine by evening. We got in the car. We went the next morning. We get up to Sudan, cross over the borders. Military friends meet us there, Christian military people, and they're going, "Thank God you didn't come yesterday." And I just said, "Why? What happened?" And they said, "Well, there's 3 factions of military all fighting, and refugees, of course, over 1 million now have crossed the border and gone into the South Sudan refugee camps. But at that particular time, he said the national security military uncovered rebel hideouts, and there was all-out war on the road, and it was just a bloody mess for several hours. You would have driven right into it." So that kind of thing of safety, we knew we were led by God, and our motto was the safest place in the world is in the center of God's will. So we started with prayer in Sudan, just like we did in northern Uganda, and would take 2 or 3, 4 weeks of prayer into these cities or towns that were the capitals of each state, and then hold massive crusades. When we'd hold these crusades in those days, we'd have 800,000 to 1 million. The biggest one was 1.2 million people. They'd walk 7 days by foot because they heard we were going to be there. I didn't count those people. I don't know how to count them. It was 360 degrees of a sea of masses of faces as far as you could see all the way around us. The government counted them. And they do it by measuring square footage, when you pack people in areas. And for 7 days, we would just preach Jesus. And we saw miracles. And I realized at that time that miracles were speaking a message to not only the world of occult and darkness, but also to the Islamic world, which was very, very thick and prevalent at that time, even before the referendum, because it was the Black Sudanese fighting for their freedom from the Arab Sudanese. And I realized people were coming and packing, and the numbers were growing night after night at these crusades, because God was just showing up as the God of the Bible. And if Jesus is the same yesterday and today and forever, we just said, we're going to come and preach Jesus, and Jesus is coming to your town. Come. And they came out of the woodwork. In the 80s, God started saving so many Muslim leaders through dreams and visions as the church began praying, because I was in the Philippines in a Muslim terrorist area, and we began seeing that happen. That is still happening. But now we're seeing Muslims come to Jesus at a radical rate through the miracles, because they want to serve the God that's alive. They want to serve the most powerful God, and they want to serve a God that loves them. And so when we come and preach Jesus like that, and the message of salvation, they're going, that's what we want. They were carrying people from witch doctors' huts and the mosques. They were all closed down, and they were carrying on mats. One lady flew in from Khartoum. She was a very wealthy lady. She heard about the Crusades, and she had a hip out of socket. She'd had many surgeries. Her name was Asha. And she heard that we were going to be in the town of Wau, which at that time was the Arab capital. This is before the referendum and before South Sudan became its own nation. She hired a private plane. She had her entourage of guards and everything, carried her on a stretcher where it, like those cots we carry with sticks, and just set her down there, and she had her guards around her, and we're just preaching the Bible and preaching Jesus. And when you have 1 million people, it's masses of people crowding. There's no way to touch people, to find who's sick. And all of a sudden, while you're just preaching Jesus, that's where Romans 1:16 became so alive. I'm not ashamed of the gospel. It is the power of God. And 1 Corinthians 1:18, the preaching of the cross is the power of God. And so we just preach Calvary and Jesus and what he did on the cross, and that healing is for today and salvation is for today, and you can be set free, and the God that loves you and is alive and is powerful. And faith entered Asha's heart as she sat there and listened, because faith comes by hearing. Nobody prayed for her, nobody touched her. Faith entered her heart, and she'd come for healing, and she'd come because she wanted a change in her life. And as faith just entered her heart, quickened her, quickened, the Holy Spirit quickens our mortal bodies. The same Spirit that raised Jesus from the dead quickens your mind. And it quickened her. She jumps up on her feet. Her hip pops back into socket after many surgeries, and the lady can't walk. Pops back in. She starts running and taking off, backward and forward across the front of the crowd where our team is preaching, screaming. She's in her Muslim garb and everything, just screaming, Jesus and, Yeshua. And that testimony speaks 1,000 miracles. Well, you should have seen him just coming and pushing to get. They brought a little girl in one of those meetings, about 7 years old, dead, totally dead. And because we said, come meet Jesus, dead or alive. It's the same Jesus that was in the Bible. And he's in us. And we're just carriers of his love and his message. And they just threw her body up there on the platform, and the mama left. And we go, okay, what do we do with this? And pick her up and just start praying over her. She opens her eyes. She starts breathing. And the mama carries her home, and she's just a skeleton because she's emaciated and deteriorated for quite some time. She came back the next night. The little girl's alive. We gave money for food, supporting her in school fees later on. The ministry did. And she's alive and well and in school today, in secondary school. So we could go on and write volumes just about these kind of miracles. But what was happening is we watched God moving in the hearts of all the way from government people down to just common marketplace people, uneducated. Commissioners are coming, mayors are coming, governors are coming, sitting on the platform, and they're looking at us like, we can't mobilize this many people for political things. How are you getting this many people together? I said, we aren't, God is. And they come to Jesus, come to Jesus, come to Jesus. Believers. I've eaten in the home of, I don't know how many governors of those states, or, generals. They were generals leading them to Jesus, praying in their offices because they watched what the living God did, and they wanted to know more about this. And so the doors just opened like that. Crusades bring thousands upon thousands upon thousands to Jesus. There's no way to count them all. Churches grow. We do pastors' meetings in the mornings. We do Bible distribution. We do water baptisms. We do kids' clubs. We do government dinners on a Saturday morning. So we just pack this week. And when we go, we strengthen the local church. But that doesn't make up for the need for discipleship. So we began leaving 2 months portable Bible school on the ground after these kind of crusades. One time, we were in a wheel And we're up on the platform, and they said, you know, the roads are dangerous. Yes, we'd been pulled over by gunpoint by the military, saying there's bloodshed right ahead of you. I've missed ambushes by minutes ahead or behind. And they said, you got to get off the road. You can't go right now. So we pull over. There's no place to sleep except maybe the Catholic convent always took us in. We'd always look for the fathers or the sisters and find a place, and they just put us up. Thank God for them. And so, and then the military would let us proceed the next day. This happened on the way to a wheel. We get up to a wheel, and I think we're third or fourth night into the crusade, and gunfire, open gunfire. And people are so used to war, they've lived in war, and somebody said, oh, don't worry about the guns unless you hear firing back. So it didn't stop, and people started kind of scattering and go for cover, but you're talking about 1 million people, and they were going to stampede. And so we thought, what do we do? Do we shut down? We stood in faith on that platform, and we said, Lord, if you can stop rain, you can stop bullets. And these people came hungry for the gospel. So we stood up as open targets on the top of this elevated platform with 360 degrees of people around you. We lifted our hands. We didn't know where the firing was come from, who was after who, but we just prayed, in the name of Jesus. We ask you to just stop that gunfire, Lord, so we can go right on with the message. And we commanded it to stop with the authority He's given us, as He said in Mark, and kept right on preaching. Gunfire stopped, people came right back in order, and we went right on with our meetings, and that's happened once. Another time we were over in Capueta with the G-string naked kind of people, and it was right after that little girl got raised from the dead and other tremendous miracles. The commissioner was sitting up on the platform, and after about 3 or 4 nights of watching this, he said to us, if your God can do this, can your God bring us rain? Our children are dying of a drought. We're in a horrible drought. Our cattle are dying. Well, when somebody asks you that, especially on a platform in front of almost 1 million people, I think that one was about 800,000 people, you're not going to say no. God can, but it's always putting Him on the line, and I love it. We call it a Mount Carmel showdown. He said, can your God bring rain? We said, sure, He can bring rain. So, okay, pray for rain. So here we are, and they've had 6 to 9 months of drought. We finished our meeting that night at the end of the meeting, and we said, Lord, this nation needs rain. Would you show yourself mighty and strong on behalf of these precious people and their children that are dying? And we just prayed. People went on home. Everybody got home midnight, which was wonderful because everybody had time to reach home. Everybody's footing it. They reach home, and we had the heavens opened with gully washer. The next day, we couldn't even drive our jeepney through the low water crossings. It was just a flood. When the commissioner saw that, he came and said, I can't believe this. I can't believe this. Now, can your God stop these bullets from this tribe up in the mountains that are killing and shooting everybody, including government people? They're the naked G-string people that everybody fears. Can your God help them? So it was like one thing after the other. And we said, yes, yes. He said, okay, then go. Kind of like, you go, but I'm not going there, because they're killers. And he knew that. They'd taken out military soldiers, everybody. I wanted to go. They wouldn't let me go. But a group of our team went, and he gave 2 military escorts and his vehicle. And it was 4 hours up the mountain through bush. And when they got there, the naked people, they get their guns out, and they're ready, cocked ready, and they usually kill anybody and everybody, and that was the history of this tribe. And so they start their signal saying, strangers are coming, and get ready for kill. This tribe comes pouring out of the jungle, out of the woodwork, and they all got guns. They got a string of bullets around their neck, and then a G-string on, and that's all they're wearing. And so they gathered around. Our team, which is about 2 or 3 people, went. At that time, we're in the car of the commissioner with 2 soldiers. And nothing against this hundreds that have just come out of the bush with their guns aimed. Now, one of our team members remembers the verse, when I go to Rome, I do as the Romans, as Paul said. And he rips off his shirt to identify with their nakedness. He knows how to do the grass touch, and he sees him on the top of the roof doing grass touch. He jumps up on the roof in a flash and starts, weaving the grass roof with the guys as they're making the chief's roof. Well, this is all quite humorous to them. Probably never seen anything like this. And they just thought, well, these people seem pretty fearless, and what are they doing? And so they're just kind of watching. Nobody fires. And they watch this little scene go on, and then the chief of the village comes over to one of the soldiers like, do you have a business here? Do you have something to say? Because he realized they're pretty harmless, and this is amusing. So the soldier could speak their language, thank God. So he interpreted, and he said, yes, we do. So our guy gets back down off the roof, and the chief motions for them to sit down. And in about 5 minutes, our team has only about 5 minutes, because these people are unpredictable. And you do one wrong move and you're dead. I mean, we drove through landmines and cannibal areas just to get up to these villages. And I was in the car for that, landmines. What are the pink ribbons there? Oh, those are untapped landmines. What is this village we're going through? We're stuck in the mud. Oh, those are just the cannibal. I said, okay, I'm glad I didn't ask. We just keep going. So at this time, when you're up there and you've got 5 minutes to give them the gospel, where do you begin? Because they never heard of Jesus, never heard the word. What's a savior? What's this? What's that? So you go back to creation. That's why the Old Testament is also so critical in bringing somebody to salvation, to know that there's a creator, and Father God, the creator, had a son, one son. And when he sacrificed his son because he loves you so much, the blood that this son shed for the redemption and buying you back from darkness and slavery and sin was all the bloodshed that's needed. No more bloodshed is needed. No more animal sacrifices, and no more killing one another. Well, that made sense to them. 5 to 10 minutes, there's the gospel of John 3:16, and he gives the invitation, how many of you want to receive this son and the sacrifice he made for you? Well, every hand shot up in the air. And the guy thought, our team of guys thought, they don't understand what I meant. So he said it again. Do you really understand what I mean? Ask him into your life. Put your guns down. No more warring. Let him be your savior. He wants to change your heart. Explained it again. How many of you want this salvation, this exchange, his blood, and for your forgiveness? If you do, stand up. Every person stands, and the chief is weeping. So then he said, okay, pray after me, and through the interpreter, of course. They all did. He said they kept holding on their guns. They didn't put their guns down, but they all prayed. The next thing they ask is, do you have any more of those stories? Are you coming back again? Will you tell us more stories? Then what happened? Everywhere we go, that's the same thing they ask. Any more stories? Then what happened? Tell us more. Tell us more. You cry because the harvest is so plentiful and the laborers are few. People won't go. Why are these people unreached? Infrastructure's not there. Road systems are not there. Yes, it's more dangerous. Yes, it's more remote. But they're unreached. And Jesus said this gospel must be preached to every tribe and every tongue, and then the end will come. Matthew 24:14. Who's going to go? And so those are the areas we're going to hit hard again now. Because of the insurgencies that have erupted in 2013 and 2016, since South Sudan became a nation and warring, roads are closed. We couldn't even get there. We couldn't even get to these rural areas. Now it's not safe, but we can go with government convoys that will allow us. And I said, we're going. These are the people that have cried for more of the stories. And we're going to do church planting and portable Bible schools. I realize crusades are powerful for piercing the darkness and coming in and making a statement of who God is, and he's coming to town through us as his believers, and he's bringing a message of love. But we must remain with discipleship, and teams must be sent. And I can't reach Africa like the Africans, so that's why we're training up an army of Indigenous leaders to go and be those missionaries. We're going to follow up with 2-month portable Bible schools, which means women empowerment, health, literacy, and everything else, but 5 hours of intense Bible school discipleship training a day for 2 months. And then we plant a church. And that church multiplies. We've seen that in northern Uganda, over 1,000 churches in the last, it happened in 5 years, and they're still growing now that it's been, close to 10 years post-war. So we know God can do it, and that's the answer for the war. If we don't go in with the gospel faster than darkness and Islam is growing, we will never advance. Christianity has the mentality of just hold your territory, let's wait till Jesus comes. No, if darkness is advancing and they're fearless about it, especially in the realms of terrorism, and they're willing to die for what they believe, where's the church? So when I challenge the Western church, I always say, look, Revelations 12:12 says, the devil knows his time is short, he's pulled out all the stops. So shouldn't the church pull out all the stops? Full throttle forward.
You're listening to an international edition of Nightlight, shining God's love light to the world.
And on this edition of Nightlight, we're hearing stories of people who've decided to follow Jesus into South Sudan, no matter what the cost. And hearing these stories, Carole, is just so encouraging that God is doing miracles in South Sudan, as great as the miracles that you read about in the Bible, really. And it's also encouraging to know that there are Christians and children of God in these places who the Lord is using mightily, who are unsung heroes to the rest of the Christian world. Please tell us about some of the Indigenous disciples in Sudan and how the Lord is using them to reach their own people.
Bashir's testimony is one that stands out the most in my mind, although there are very, very many. But one time, and I spent 50% of my time in South Sudan. Again, even the Sudanese look at me and go like, you didn't come by road, did you? You didn't just come in here by road? I go, yeah. And they just start crying like, you love us that much? And I said, yes. And they said, even Sudanese don't, come by road. They fly. They fly into South Sudan because the roads are dangerous. I had just come by road from a wheel on a 5-day journey back to Juba. And as I entered Juba, some of the believers there said, Carole, you got to meet this guy. And I'm thinking, okay, great. Whoever, So we sat down in one of this little church right outside of Juba. And I'm sitting there with our team, and we're on our way back over the border to Uganda. And they said, you got to meet Bashir. He's just from Khartoum. Now, this is after the referendum, and it's after South Sudan had become independent. So in walks Bashir, and he's a black Sudanese. There are Arab Sudanese, and then there are the black national, indigenous. And he was black Sudanese. And he had come from the south about probably 20 years ago and gone to Khartoum, even when it was one nation still, as a missionary, undercover. And he was setting up his business and supporting mission work on his own through his own business, which was videography. He did very well at and worked with Al Jazeera, training reporters and so forth. But he would use his income to make Arabic Bible stories for children on DVDs and numerous other teaching tools for undercover missionaries of the Sudanese who were going into Arab areas with the gospel, Islamic areas. So this was all in Arabic. He spoke the standard Arabic, which was wonderful because that's what's spoken in the northern part. And he was using also his funds for equipping and doing leadership training and missionary equipment of the black Sudanese believers to reach not just northern Sudan, but northern parts of Africa that are in the 1040 window, unreached, and very hard to penetrate with the gospel because of either Islam or a cult, but mostly Muslim areas. So he had been in Khartoum for 20 years. Now, during that time, he had been imprisoned many times, captured and imprisoned because he was suspected to be a spy and be equipping people like this. And the people that he was training and sending into villages and areas throughout northern parts of Sudan oftentimes would get arrested and brought for confinement and imprisonment in Khartoum and then execution. So Bashir himself, on many of his own imprisonments, was watching the arrest and imprisonment of these young, zealous, radical believers that he trained and sent out. And now they're in prison with him and up for execution. And one after the other, as they were executed, before they would tell him their stories. So he got to hear the feedback and the fruit of what he had equipped and sent them out to do. And one after the other, they would say, we'd get up there to these villages. God would show us exactly the huts and where to go. We'd see a whole village come to Jesus from one hut after the other, from signs, wonders, and miracles, and get turned upside down in a week. And we knew it would cost us our lives. And Bashir would ask him, why did you do it? And the answer was the same, one after the other. What is our life in exchange for a whole village coming to Jesus? Our eternity is secure, theirs is not. Why wouldn't we? One of them I asked, why did you go? And they say, have you ever seen David run away from Goliath? Are you kidding? Or the three men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, bow their knee to the gods of Nebuchadnezzar at that time. They said, if we die, we die. But we're going to stand for the testimony. So Bashir would watch them executed. Now, he didn't face execution himself because he was suspected by the Muslim leaders at that time that he was a spy and they wanted his information. So they kept saying, give us your database. He'd have to hand him his website, but he set passwords to where they flip every 10 or 15 minutes, and it was confounding the mind, even of the lawyers. It made them suspect even more that this guy's a spy. So they beat him aggressively, kick him, smash, all kinds of torture. He didn't even go into it because he was weeping. It was so painful. It was only 2 days out of solitary confinement when I met him for the first time. And then they'd release him and then follow him to try to see what his movements were in building and raising the underground church to go into these areas. But this last time they arrested him, they said, this is it. We are executing you. They put him in solitary confinement and they fed him breadcrumbs through this little hole in the top of this cement cell, watching him on camera. If he moved his lips, they came and smashed his head on the concrete, kicked his guts in with their boots, and all kinds of whippings and beatings. It was a little toilet hole, and that was his only water for drinking and urinating and everything else. And they said 21 days. It was either 21 or 31 days. I can't remember exactly right. And then it's your execution if you don't give us the information we need, the database, why you're doing this, and who are all of these Jesus people that are going north, converting our people. He didn't give the information. They had the database, but again, the password kept changing and made him angrier and angrier. So the day before his execution, in walks an Arab lawyer and said, I don't know why I'm doing this, but I'm going to give you one last chance. You either turn over your information to us and your bank account and your vehicle, your business, and everything you own, and get on the next plane out of Khartoum and never show yourself again in Sudan. Tomorrow's your execution. So they gave him a choice, miraculously. Obviously, he chose the first because he was alive and I saw him. So he gets on the next plane, deported out, lands in Juba. Some believers meet him, and I'm sitting there the next day telling us his story as we sat on the floor around him listening, like we're listening to something out of Voice of the Martyrs, just bawling. I'm bawling. And I'm going, Bashir, what can we do? How can we get in there? I want to go. He said, you can't go. You're too noticeable. You're a security risk, but you can raise up an African army to go. He said, we need Arabic Bibles on solar. We need USB drives. He said, I just gave my last ones away, and so on and so forth. And then I said, what are you going to do? He said, I'm going to get well. I'm going right back in there. He said, I've got to go to Dubai. They're sending me to Germany for treatment. Found out later, while he was sitting there talking to us, his skull is cracked. And all of his internal organs are damaged and bruised. They thought he was going to lose one of his kidneys that was smashed from the kicking and beating. I mean, he was a mess, and yet he held himself together. And his final words to us were, it is not going to be the organized religion that wins the Muslim world to the Lord Jesus Christ. It's going to be the radical, sold out, on fire, zealous, young, indigenous missionaries ready to die for their faith. And they're going to turn the villages, one village at a time, upside down for Jesus. It's going to win the Muslim world. And I determined at that time, God, how can we raise this army? How can we send him? I asked Bashir for his phone number, email. He said, I can't give it to you. They'll follow me and I'll be dead. So we left, we prayed for him. I thought I'd never see the man again. 2 years later, 2015, I'm in Juba, and I'm organizing the National Prayer Gathering, which was an amazing story in itself. 1,000 believers, political, government, intelligence officers on their faces on the crusade ground for 11 hours a day, 7 days, 77 hours we prayed. And in the middle of that week, the first peace treaty was signed with internal government systems. It was miraculous. God did amazing things. But as I was there for that prayer gathering, in walks Bashir to the crusade grounds. I just screamed. I couldn't believe it. I said, "You're alive, you're alive. I prayed for you, I prayed for you. Sit down and tell me." So another 2 hours and I'm just bawling. What's happened since I saw you last? He said, "I went down to Dubai and then Germany, all these places." He said, "I got better, came back over to Sudan." And he said, South Sudan. He said, "I went right back north." He said, "I can't use my passport." So he said, "I crossed the border at different places. God would show me at different times where to go." He reminds me not only of the book of Acts, but Romans 8:14, "As many as are led of the Spirit are the sons of God." He said, I live by the voice of God. Sometimes I cross the border inside of a gunny sack. They tie me to the back of a cattle with luggage. He said, sometimes I get in a cattle truck and I sit down in the manure under the feet and I cross like that, and sometimes through swamps. He said one time I went 3 days with swamp water up to my waist fighting snakes to get to where I was supposed to go into that region of Sudan with the gospel. He said, when I'm over the border, if I miss God's voice by one direction, right or left, he said, I'm dead. So God speaks to me, tells me where village, turn right, turn left, turn right, turn left, and go to such and such a house in that village. I get there, he said, and the house is 30 to 50 people every time, the little house in this Muslim village, packed with Muslim dressed people waiting for me. And when I knock on the door and I walk in, they greet him. "Where have you been? Where have you been? We've been waiting for you." And he goes, like, "How did you know I was coming?" And they said, the story was the same every time. "A man came to us in a dream last night and said somebody was going to come and tell us about this prophet Jesus in our own language. Look for him and be waiting." And they said, "We've been waiting for you." He'd walk in. Of course, this is a ready-made, he's got their attention. It's a ready-made house church. And he begins preaching Jesus. He leads them all to the Lord. He said, "I leave either solar Arabic Bibles or USB, if I have any." He said, "I'll stay 3 to 5 days and baptize them all, and as they give their lives to the Lord." And then he said, "I'll leave one person or two in charge of the house church and give them instructions. Continue on." And they pack me a lunch. They never ask where I'm going. They cannot. It's a security risk. And I leave that village and God will tell me exactly which way to head by foot, and I walk to the next village. He tells me exactly which house to go in. Same thing. And he said, I do this house after house, village after village. He said the last house I was in, I baptized 56 Muslim believers. They're a ready audience because they're so tired of the darkness, the oppression, the victimization of what Islam is. It is a regime, and many of them were born in it. They didn't have a choice. They've just that's all they've known. They've grown up in it, and they want the answer. They want the truth, and they want something better. And now we're working with Darfurian believers as well, not just others from Khartoum and training up, but Adam's testimony is phenomenal too. He grew up in Darfur. It's 100% Muslim, but as he got to secondary school, Adam said, I began questioning the Quran, and I began arguing with my teachers. In my heart, I knew it wasn't true. And I began arguing, saying, this is a lie. This isn't true. It doesn't even match itself. They threw me in prison over and over again, imprisoned. He too was deported to Khartoum and almost killed. And at the last minute, some guard came in and said, I don't know why I'm doing this, but I'm going to help you get a ticket out. And he came out. Now he's a missionary raising up Darfurian believers from Juba and sending them back into Darfur with the gospel. Same stories. And so I meet randomly key people that are already saying, we're training them up and sending them, but only 1 or 2 at a time. Can you help us? Can you help us? Can you get the Bibles in Arabic? And that's our job now, is to come alongside the people that God's already using like that. They need reinforcements. The laborers are few. They need resources. And the believers in the South are the most radical evangelists because they've just come out of this regime. And they're on fire for Jesus. They know what it tastes like to be free. And they want to give all their brothers and sisters up there in darkness and in bondage the same freedom they've just found in Jesus. It's beautiful.
Shining bright through the dark night, you're listening to Nightlight.
Carole, for those listening who'd like to know more about your mission, where can they go? How can they get in touch?
As of now, we're Favor Africa Online, F-A-V-O-U-R, but we hope to put more and more of these stories on the website so the Western world knows there are laborers in the field that God is using, and it is the Indigenous people. And we're coming alongside them because we live there, we're on the ground, but the harvest is plentiful. And I've never seen it so ripe, and we're going to lose it if we don't reach it today. Jesus said it's not 4 months, it's now. That means if the harvest is ripe today, it will be rotten tomorrow. We're losing it. We're not getting to it fast enough. It's not to try to pick a fruit that's not right. It's falling on the ground and rotting. So continue praying for these regions, because prayer has done tremendous amount as God is appearing to Muslims in dreams and visions and transforming leaders this way. But he's also coming with signs, wonders, and miracles, and he's also raising up an Indigenous army. A lot more stories are in the book. It's on Amazon, and the title is Send Me Where No One Wants to Go. And so you can find it there. But yes, pray for this army of African believers that God's raising up. Thank you.
Well, that's all for now from me, from Carole, and from our dogs, who you've heard making their contribution in the background. God bless. I'll be back again soon with another edition of Nightlight. Bye-bye.